because we went through the list before this. Everything but Thor: The Dark World. Jared's seen everything but two. What?
I've seen all of them except Thor: The Dark World, and I haven't seen The Incredible Hulk.
And Matthew, how many have you seen them all?
Oh, I've seen them all and a few multiple times.
Okay.
But to the New Yorker point, then, first of all, I don't imagine there's a whole lot of overlap in the Venn diagram between New Yorker subscribers and comic book fans.
Right.
I think it just might be me, honestly. So they're speaking to their audience, and they're warning them, hey, this is going to be the best-selling movie of all time, but maybe you don't have to be contributing to those ticket sales. So I can see why they're doing that.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So how do we differentiate this between like a TV show? So let's take a TV show like The Walking Dead. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers, but like characters die in The Walking Dead. And, when they die, they don't come back, even though, let's say that, let's just say character X. Now, I'm sure that, the studio or the network that makes The Walking Dead probably makes a good amount of money making action figures from character X, but they kill them off and they stay dead. But what is it about like the Disney business model or this thing that makes us certain that they are coming back and that it's not going to be like The Walking Dead, or it's not going to be like how we normally handle deaths in television?
I think the history of comic books is instructive because comics, even long before the death of Superman in the early 90s, constantly kill off the main heroes, the ones that are headlining books, and it's just another few years till there's a resurrection. And despite what, was said to Loki, there are going to be resurrections, and not just of individual characters, whole universes get resurrected. Every 5 years or so nowadays, the DC Comics entire multiverse gets destroyed, rebooted. You're going to see this eventually happen with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Eventually, I don't know if it's going to be 5, 10, 20 years from now, they're going to say, hey, people loved the classic Avengers characters, your Thor, your Captain America, your Iron Man. Those actors' contracts expired long ago. We don't have the Fantastic Four, the X-Men that we're making films of anymore after phase 4, 5, 6. Let's reboot it all. Let's say the Marvel Cinematic Universe is over. This is the brand new Marvel Cinematic Universe 2.0. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
That's absolutely the Amazing Spider-Man syndrome of the whole MCU is going to happen. It's going to be the Amazing MCU.
Yeah, if there's a parallel, it's with soap operas, right? Like, you kill off a person and then they come back as the evil twin, but then it turns out that the person didn't really die, but they've just been hiding out for a long time because someone else was trying to get them, or someone falls into a coma and then they're gone for like 6 months, but then they come back. I mean, this is basically, it's like that, the ups and downs of the dopamine rush that you get from those simple kinds of storylines, and you can do that probably endlessly.
Well, no, Matthew is saying that they'll literally wipe the slate clean and just say, kind of like they did with Amazing Spider-Man, and then just say, all right, those movies don't exist now. Here's a new universe, and we're starting over.
Yeah, eventually. And it's just like you said, like they did with Spider-Man, right? Where they have like the Tobey Maguire, and then they have the Andrew Garfield, and now they have the Tom Holland, and it's like, okay.
But the important distinction is that when it happens in the Marvel MCU, it'll be a consistent world. It's just that in this universe, one reality dies and a new one is created.
That's what you're saying. You're saying it is within the same universe. It's just that because there's a whole reality element.
Right. Like there's
new
between Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, like there's no like two New Yorks.
Exactly.
They're two totally separate things. They don't connect.
That's what I was saying.
No,
this
is going to be like there are two
in the story.
Yes, there are two dimensions.
That's what I hope happens more than
that's
the
what's going to happen. I think like if they do have new Captain Americas and new Iron Mans, it's going to be consistent within the narrative of the MCU. It's all going to be the same thing.
If they keep the comic book conventions, that's what they'll do. Like it'll be the Ultimate Comics from the early 2000s where they wanted to get new viewers in, so they just rebooted everything without getting rid of the old MCU. And eventually they said, okay, they're both part of the greater Marvel universe. One is Earth 616, the other is 1610, and they can interact with one another somehow. Whether it's going to be that or Flashpoint from the Flash TV series where it's just time travel reboot, who knows how it'll happen.
So when do we get to the point of diminishing returns where we can no longer do this? I mean that both in terms of story, but also in terms of like from a filmic perspective, from a cinematic perspective. Like how does this end? Yeah, I mean, so it's a $400 million investment.
I mean, right now there's no end in sight.
Right, but I feel like it's got to be, right? I mean, Or is it endless growth? I just
I would
don't
have figured that
understand.
literally 8 movies ago. I mean, around Avengers 1, think about how crazy Avengers 1 was. It was like, wow, they've been building up to this for forever, you know? Like, that was like a crazy thing. It felt like a whole lifetime since Iron Man 1. And now here we are. It's like, well, that was like fucking forever ago.
One interesting, like that, it happened with Transformers. Like Transformers 6 was the breaking point. Like all Transformers 1 through 5 were all blockbusters, and then the one where they go back in time to the fucking time of King Arthur tanked just out of nowhere. Like it proved that even things that, I mean, I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is different, and the reason why I think it's different, I think that this exhaustion with the material would have happened a lot earlier if the movies weren't as good as they are. I mean, I think that's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And all credit to Kevin Feige and all the talent he assembles, because I would blame Transformers 6 on one man named Michael Bay.
Yeah,
who
and
just-
you're absolutely right. But I mean, you know, Michael Bay was operating under the assumption it's like, oh man, as long as I explode shit, you know, I can just keep making these movies and make billions for the rest of my life. But eventually, people did get tired.
But
of
I
it.
do think that Transformers 6 made money, though.
Yeah, probably in China, but not at least domestically. And
Yeah, but
ultimately,
that's all that matters.
Ultimately, that is what matters. But I mean, I'm sure it's certainly not good news for Michael Bay to realize that, you know, his numbers are down. That's not.
Yeah.
And didn't Black Panther make more money than Avengers?
Oh, yeah, definitely. But Black Panther's top 3 movies, I think, ever at this point.
As a solo origin film, and he's a very minor character compared to some of the more famous Avengers that were introduced earlier. So Marvel definitely has it within their capacity to keep introducing B-listers, C-listers.
I mean, look at Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah,
Who
that
the
was
fuck
like
knew who they
that was
were?
a joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're getting the X-Men, presumably. That's what the rumor is, that they've negotiated with Fox. So once the X-Men get into the cinematic universe, that's going to extend it. Phase 4, 5, 6.
Yeah,
it's going to be a
another
while.
19 movies.
I have to admit it. I was in a good mood before this podcast started, and now I'm angry. I literally, you have angered me in this discussion.
You
This-
don't like the idea of
No.
X-Men versus Avengers?
No,
You don't
so
see
I
that?
want to transition this
more to
conversation
find
to
here.
what does the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Disney's current business model, what does it do to the state of cinema? So I'm assuming this is transitioning into your anger, Austin.
I can't even talk right now. I literally have no thoughts. I just have anxiety. I'm physically anxious right now. This is really weird. It's you guys just talking about billions and return on investment. All I can see are like numbers flying in my head right now, and my Marxist brain is like exploding. I'm like, the corruption of art just simply through commodification. God damn it.
You don't think both can exist alongside each other? I mean, in the past few years,
Exactly.
we've gotten Whiplash, we've gotten La La Land, we've gotten these great artistic, true pieces of cinema, and we've
Thank you,
also gotten the
Matthew.
big budget stuff.
Yeah.
So here's what I'll say. You know, there's a famous line by William Goldman, who's like a kind of a guru screenwriter. And he had this famous line that in Hollywood, nobody knows anything. And I think we talked about this in our Fargo podcast a little bit, in that when Fargo came out, it was just a chance that the studio took. It was this weird script. Nobody knew that it was going to, and it hit, you know, like it was a cheap movie to make, and it made its investment back 5-fold. Now, granted, it probably only cost like $30 million to make, and maybe probably not 5-fold. It probably cost like $30 million to make, and maybe it made like 120 or something like that. You know, it was a small, I mean, compared to the profits that we're seeing in the Avengers. But the point is that
find
studios
anything
looked
else.
at Fargo and the success of Fargo and said, wow, you know, nobody knows what's going to succeed, so we should take chances. And I think one of the tragedies that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has proven is that that's not true anymore. People know. It's not that nobody knows anything anymore. It's people know what's going to win, and what wins is IP. And it's sad to me, and I think a lot of this also has to do with data. Because the studios are so ingrained in data and knowing exactly what they want, and with our hyper-connected society, they have a line directly to their fans, are able to know exactly what people want, and they can just give people what they want. And I think that that's really harmful to creativity, because now, first of all, the business model has changed to where there are much fewer movies made outside of Netflix these days, because people want to make, you know, these movies that cost $300 million to make but make $2 billion back. They would rather just focus all their efforts on that than make small Fargos and stuff, especially when it's a sure shot, which these Marvel movies have proven to be. So I do think that it is harmful to the creativity and the creative spirit of cinema, because no one takes chances, because there's no reason to anymore. There's no reason to make a Fargo.
I disagree with most everything you just said.
Okay.
But the one thing I do agree is that if you're talking about the theatrical cinematic experience, then yes, like the Marvel, what they're doing, I mean, they're basically making it to where, yeah, a theatrical Fargo is not going to happen, but a Fargo, like you just said, on Netflix happens every fucking day, you know? Like I'm so optimistic about the state of cinema if you count online, because so much cool shit's getting made all the fucking time for very low budgets, you know, and they're getting their own niche followings and they're being supported, which could never have happened on a theatrical release business model. You know, it was
today it can't.
Today it can't, but it was only a very small period of time for like 15 years in the 70s where people were, you know, and a little bit in the 90s
yeah, the
too.
Harvey Weinstein era.
Yeah, and stuff where the resurgence, you know, of independent cinema, but that's rare, and that was a moment in time, and now that is happening online, and I think that that's awesome. And like Matthew was just saying, you can take both, where basically, yeah, theatrical movies are going to turn into roller coaster rides, you know, and then you're going to be getting all the cool brainy stuff online, and that's just going to be how it goes. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It sucks because it is, every movie's better in a theater, but you know, fads change.
Well, not
man.
only is it better in a theater, but I would argue that the medium, and today more than the medium, it's the platform, dictates what the content is. So
Yeah,
I would argue,
I
would argue that if movies are made to be watched on your phone or on your iPad or even on Netflix on your small TV, I think that inherently, or I think that it's inevitable that things just start blending together, and movies and episodic TV and documentary series just become content.
Is that a bad thing?
I think it is, because then if we're talking about cinema as a particular discipline, that
As a 2 hour, hour and a half to 2 hour,
as a 2 hour thing, that
story
with
three acts, and
that is not something that you watch in the background while you're doing dishes as ambience. It's something that you watch in a dark theater that, you know, is optimized for a large screen, where details matter, where rhythm matters, where sound design, where subtlety matters. These are the things that are going to die with Netflix.
Well, right, but then also another thing with that is that, you know, don't you think that that's more of a people? It's not like Marvel made that happen. It's like people, their tastes have changed, and now people like to do different shit. And
well, I think that technology has basically just brainwashed people into. I mean, basically, technology has diminished our ability to our attention spans. Technology's diminished our attention spans. It's not that people say, "Oh, I don't like that anymore." It's that, you know, we have flashing, you know, spectacles put in front of us that we get addicted to, and then like our tastes change because of that.
Yeah.
Right, and that's my big concern with this, is the effect that it has on social relations, because I think we're still speaking in the abstract about like what this is going to do for the particular form of media that we call cinema or film or visual image or something like that. But if we just kind of broaden it out and think of this as a social activity, which is what it is. It's an artistic expression that is conveying feelings, emotions. It's delving in interpersonal conflicts. I mean, the reason that this film, I think, was actually so successful to me is because even though I hadn't watched the buildup of these characters and their relationships and the tensions, like I knew enough. Like I've watched video essays and I've read reviews, so I kind of know what the Avengers had a falling out, and I know about like some of the budding romances and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so it still got me in the feels because there was still a human story that was on display. And that's what storytelling is. And ultimately, this is a form of storytelling that is supposed to have some sort of social function. And I don't mean that in a limiting sense, like it must have a social function to create cohesion so that we have a better society. But I mean simply, if you look at the history of humanity, ontologically, there's no difference between Avengers and myth-making stories that you've had from thousands and thousands of years ago. They do something that is essentially human. And my worry is when art becomes commodified and is simply serving the dopamine rush, the stimulation of pleasure for that fleeting moment to just give you satisfaction. What that does is it front loads the purpose of storytelling. And I think this is kind of what Jared is talking about. The medium transforms the content. And in the way that the medium transformed the content from a sort of social critic perspective is that profit is what transforms the content, which means that all they're trying to feed you are Easter eggs. So you can sit there in the audience and you could be like, oh, I recognize that Easter egg. Boom, dopamine rush. Oh, there's a character that I know that reminds me of my childhood. Boom, dopamine rush. Oh, there's another bit of pleasure. Ooh, pleasure. Ooh, pleasure, and you just become these machines for consuming these things to make yourselves happy. And that is a social problem for me, like a big problem.
But I think that Marvel knows. I mean, I think that what you just described exists in pop culture for sure. But I think Marvel knows that it has to be fucking good at the end of the day. I mean, all the movies have super high Rotten Tomato ratings, and they realize that is the ultimate dopamine rush. Whenever you can go, hey man, you need to go watch this movie, and you genuinely mean it to all your friends, And
right, but why? But go see it because your fucking dopamine was.
Well, see, the thing I would disagree with, the thing I would disagree with, Austin, is I think that art has always been about the dopamine rush. I think the tragedy is that we've just become so efficient at stimulating that dopamine that it's scary.
I think that's why it was so exciting when there was rumors that Quentin Tarantino was going to direct the next Star Trek, because the fact of the matter is intellectual property is what gets butts in the seats. That time has changed to where that is the fact now. But having an auteur direct it, we can still have someone with vision to ensure that this is cinema in addition to commercially viable.
Yeah, that's why people were excited when Edgar Wright was supposed to do Ant-Man, right?
Oh, I wish.
Right.
Yeah.
Me too.
Right, me too, man. I just saw the new trailer after this for Ant-Man and Wasp or whatever, and I was like, Jesus, that looks awful. And I was thinking, like, how cool would it have been? If Edgar Wright took over that?
Yeah, because Edgar Wright doesn't want to make movie by committee.
Right.
Wait a minute, where the fuck was Paul Rudd in this movie?
He was there,
why
dude. He was
wasn't
just
he in
really
the
small.
movie?
Come on, you didn't see him?
He had they had a line that said he had taken the deal because his family had too much pressure on them from the Accords. Him, and there was another one that was written out too. I don't recall.
Yeah, don't they say something at one point? Like, they said something at one point like, oh, there's an ant and didn't they say that at some point? Or was that a trailer?
That was a different point, but it was Hawkeye that was also his family decided, hey, we got to surrender to the government with the Accords.
Are there like contractual reasons for, like, is there some sort of other reason why they weren't in the movie other than whatever the narrative reason was?
I avoided so many spoilers. Like, until the day before, I didn't even know it was a two-parter. I have no idea about any contractual reasons for that.
It does seem odd. All right, so one other thing I wanted to bring up. So I remember seeing this clip on the internet a long time. I don't know how you guys feel about Bill Maher. It's not really relevant. But on his show, he at the end of his show, he does that like final thought or whatever. Or maybe that's Jerry Springer. Either way. He said that he was criticizing the ubiquity of superhero movies. He was talking about how it used to be that during the summertime we rewarded ourselves with dumb movies. Now he says it's dumb movies all the time. But more than that, he said that this obsession with superhero movies propels us to seek idols and believe that our problems can be solved by an individual, that we're all kind of looking for Superman. And then he made what one might consider egregious leap to say that, like, this kind of disposition is, what leads to, like strongman people like Trump, that people, like say like, oh, this single man can fix all my problems. I think it's an interesting point. I think that it's mostly conjecture. I don't really have any reason to believe that there is any kind of causation between those two, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. If there's any other, like, this obsession with superheroes and the fact that basically superheroes are taking over pretty much all of our entertainment, at least our theater entertainment. Do you think that there's any kind of other ramifications like that?
I mean, we got to be careful with correlation and causation here, right? But there is an interesting correlation between the increase of opioid addiction, depression diagnosis, anxiety diagnosis, pharmaceutical medication. We're in the midst of a global financial depression that, trust me, for people out there that are thinking the economy is doing well, it's not. Yeah, unemployment is low, but people dropping out of the workforce is accelerating at a crazy rate. People are like, oh, but more black people are employed. No, more black people are dropping out of the workforce. The unemployment numbers are skewed. Our debt is mounting like crazy. People feel the anxiety. Precarity at work is higher than it's ever been. There are some serious tensions that are simmering beneath the surface, and I think there's a felt sense of that. And so that's why these films are so wonderful, because they do give you that alleviation. They do kind of give you a bit of satisfaction in the midst of anxiety.
So you're just saying pure escapism.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways movies are always a form of escapism, and like you just said a minute ago, I do think is a form of escapism. But when it becomes just a reactionary escapism to hide from the anxieties, that's when it becomes oppressive in the psychoanalytic sense, and that's when it becomes problematic, because you're repressing, if you will, these anxieties that you ought to be able to try to work through, and we can't do that. And so I don't know that there's a causal effect there. But it is curious to note that there are these social social anxieties that are emerging at an exponential rate in correlation to the increase of these types of films that are producing greater heights, if you will, of pleasure. I don't know the answer, but it is curious to look at.
I think it's one of those psychological things where it's the only movies that are coming out where you know exactly what you're going to get. Like in terms of if you're bringing your full family to the theater or whatever, you're not taking a gamble. It's just like, all right, Marvel, I see that name, and I know I'm going to have fun and that there's going to be good jokes and crazy effects. Whereas pretty much any other movie, I can't think of any other thing that comes out where you're just like, you have that much assurance that you're going to have fun.
To Bill Maher's point about looking to some other hero to step in and save you, I've been a fan of superheroes, whether straight up comic book heroes or fantasy heroes or sci-fi heroes, in every medium across my life, what used to be called nerd culture. And what always struck me as odd was that so few of my Confederates really found inspiration in these stories. Like for me, I have always wanted to go be the vigilante superhero like Phoenix Jones. Like I try hitting the gym. I try becoming these things, emulating them. I read these stories and comics. I watch these movies and I'm inspired. I watch superhero movies at the gym every day on the treadmill, because that gets me moving. And that is definitely not the case for most people. And I don't understand the disconnect there where it's escapist and not inspirational.
Yeah, my homie used to, when he was at the gym on the treadmill, he used to pretend like he loved Bourne movies and James Bond movies, and he used to pretend when he was running on the treadmill that he had a bomb on his back, that he had to get it out of the city, and he had to run as fast as he could when he would get really tired to get the bomb out of the city. So I can see how it would be inspirational in that way. It is very particularly American though. Right? There is something interesting about this. Not that they don't have hero characters in other cultures, but there is something interesting about how the American superhero is purely individualistic and about your own growth and your own inspiration. And it's never about making the world actually better. It's always about solving the problem, but it's not about changing the social structures. Batman doesn't go in and donate all of his money or support some sort of political candidate to actually institute better social services, right? It's like, I'm just going to be a reactionary to solve the problems and to save people because the world is fucked. So there's a nihilism that undercuts it.
Is there a genuine collectivist superhero?
There needs to be a superhero of the left.
Well, there used to be The Authority by Mark Millar. That he definitely takes that on, that exact issue where they do try to transform society. Miracle Man by Alan Moore, he completely transforms society.
Let's make those into movies.
Even Batman Inc., where he tries to solve crime and he says, okay, the problem to systemic crime, or the solution to that problem, is just more Batman everywhere, internationally.
So you don't think that Thanos transformed society? I think he definitely did at the end of the movie.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Maybe he's the superhero of the left. No, that's actually dark. We didn't get to talk much about it, but it would have been really interesting to kind of get into what was his motivation, and I know we're running long, but there's some really interesting stuff because there are current trends in the subculture of the alt-right that are actually kind of arguing for this as well. And this idea of depopulating the earth is something that has existed across the political spectrum throughout history, and it's a really interesting thing to kind of work
there's
through.
People on the left too, on the environmental
side.
That's
why I said across the political spectrum. Yeah,
but
what currently in the alt-right, there's something. Yeah, go ahead.
DDEV, is that what it's called?
I don't know.
Yes, like de-development. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There have been a couple, even on our quick take, there have been a couple comments of Thanos isn't crazy. He's just ahead of the curve.
That's right. No, really.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that do think hey, we've got 7 billion people on the planet. We're slated to have 10 billion by 2050. We need to be operating at 2.5 to 3 billion. So what's the humane way of culling?
I think we're going to figure that out.
Yeah, well,
I think we always have in the past. Everyone was scared about the population boom, 30 years ago.
I have this mystical belief that the Earth just either makes people depressed or makes them less horny. The Earth is going to make sure that the population stays, it's going to sterilize people, it's going to give people these mental diseases, or it's going to make us so alienated from each other that we don't breed.
That is Malthusian. That's literally what Thomas Malthus talks about. He talks about when we get overpopulated, he's like, something will happen, famine or pestilence. He said, or there'll be some sort of correction that will make it so that we can operate at the levels of subsistence again, so that we don't have too many people. And one of the things he said is that what if people stop getting married and stop having children. And so, because he was a pastor, he was a reverend, and he says what will happen is it will stimulate men's vices, implying that they'll go and visit prostitutes rather than get married and make children, and they won't be populating the earth anymore. But what that will do is that will decrease the rate of population growth and allow for subsistence to get back to an equilibrium.
Well, the two
And
things...
now we have porn.
The two things historically that have decreased the rate of population growth have always been wealth and education. And as a society gets wealthier and more educated, they do have smaller and smaller next generations. That's why in the West, that's exactly the trend that's happening.
Right, except now in Japan and things like that, their rates of population growth are actually decreasing, which is quite interesting because they are a wealthy, developed nation. So
That's what he's saying.
Exactly, yeah, to my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his
I'm
point.
sorry. I thought you meant that it was...
All right, guys, we are
okay,
running a bit long, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Before we wrap it up, though, where can we find you guys on the internet?
Matthew.
You can find my blog at hubcityreview.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Matt J. Therio, THERIAULT. Is how you-
What kind of stuff you do on your blog, man?
It's a lot of comic book analysis, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
sweet.
I mean, I met Matthew because he emailed me and said, hey, look at my blog, and I read his blog, and I'm like, this guy knows his shit.
Okay. Cool. Origin story.
Yeah.
I think it was my defense of Batman v Superman. I love that movie.
Yeah, that touched me because there's half of me is a Batman v Superman apologist. Austin
You can find me on Twitter, Austin_Hayden.
and Ryan.
You can find me on Facebook and YouTube at Ryan Shorts and Ryan's Game Show. We got all sorts of weird comedy vids on there.
Cool, and you can follow me at Wisecrack on Twitter or my Instagram at Father of Woody, where you can see pictures of my dog and my girlfriend's dog. All right, that's it for today. I want to thank everyone for joining me. Thank you, Matthew. It was great having you on. Can't wait to do this again.
Oh, thank you.
And
Yeah, man. Good to meet you.
absolutely. And until next time, we'll see you later.
Goodbye from Hollywood, California.
I think you broke me this episode. Bye.
See y'all.
Peace out, y'all.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Show Me the Meaning, Wisecrack's movie podcast.
Show me the meaning.
My name is Jared, and I'm joined here with the Show Me the Meaning crew. We got Ryan
What up, film fans?
and Austin.
Hey.
And joining us from the This Movie Changed Me podcast from On Being Studios is Lily Percy. How are you doing, Lily?
Good. Hi, everyone.
Great
What's
to
up,
have you
Lily?
here.
What's up, guys?
Thanks for coming on. So today we are doing the 2005 movie directed by Judd Apatow starring Steve Carell, The 40-Year-Old Virgin. As always, let's go around and get some first impressions. Let's start with Ryan. Ryan, what do you remember about the first time you saw this movie and what was it like revisiting it?
The first time I saw it, I remember not really kind of being like, what am I missing here? Because it was a big smash hit, and I kind of didn't really like it. You know, as
Give me
much
some
as everyone.
context. How old were you?
Okay, this was
Or like-
2004 that came out.
2005.
2005, yeah. So I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
Right, and but I do remember being a big Judd Apatow fan. You know, so I was excited that he was directing a movie.
'Cause you liked Freaks
'Cause
and- Freaks and Geeks?
I love Freaks and Geeks. I loved Heavyweights. I loved Celtic Pride. All of his early stuff. And then,
Was
so
Celtic
then when it came
Pride
out,
with Daniel Stern by chance?
yeah, oh my,
Yeah.
and Dan Aykroyd.
Oh my God, I remember
Me and
that.
my dad really liked that movie. Yeah, so anyway, I had high hopes, and then kind of over the years, I remember being disappointed the first time I saw it. Over the years, I kind of had it in my mind, like, I really don't like the Judd Apatow style, let's roll the camera for hours and just wing it and improv the lines, because it comes off in the movie as that. You can just tell that half the lines are just them kind of like their 10th take of the idea that came to their mind, you know? So I don't really like that style. However, having said that, this was definitely my funnest time to watch it because I had a lot of... It is one of those movies you can just turn on. I feel like it's on like CBS or something all the time, and you're just like, there's just jokes that come every about 20, 30 seconds. There's good characters. I love Paul Rudd in this movie. I love Jane Lynch in this movie.
Yeah.
There's some awesome moments. So yeah, overall, I liked it more than I used to.
Interesting. All right, let's go with Lily next.
So the first time I saw it was I had graduated from college the year before, so I was 23 and I'd just moved to New York. And I remember going to see it in the theater. Similarly to Ryan, I loved Freaks and Geeks and all of Judd Apatow's work and was really excited about about watching it. I was also a huge Steve Carell fan. I had a big crush on him, so this was another motivation for me. And I remember being so blown away by the fact that they balanced this character who was so vulnerable and kind and thoughtful with so many jokes, honestly, and just raw, raunchy humor. And that's kind of the heart of me, is being raunchy and vulgar and having these inappropriate jokes, but then also this lovely, thoughtful vulnerability.
We're going to get along great.
Yeah, right? And I honestly just related to him so much in dating. I've always been a disaster in dating, and really at times was just like, I'm just going to give up. This is just not a good idea for me. And so watching his character kind of navigate that, and then literally see him having given up for most of his life on dating and sex, it was really lovely for me as a woman to see a man go through that.
Interesting. What about you, Austin?
I mean, I have no fucking clue the first time was when I saw this. I know that in my memory, if you would have asked me a week ago, what do I think about 40-Year-Old Virgin, I would have had positive attachments to it, because I'm sure I would have loved it, and it's funny.
What happened?
Yeah, I mean...
Exactly what happened from a week to now.
He shaved his beard.
I shaved my beard, and I lost all my Samson strength, and I'm no longer a man, and I can't deal with man jokes. No, I actually, as weird as it sounds, and I hate to be like the Debbie Downer, but you guys have me on here because I'm like the critical theorist. I'm supposed to be like the wanky douchebag that navel gazes, right? So
Absolutely.
I'm gonna play that role right now.
We're about to get problematic, aren't we?
I'm about to get problematic, bruh. I haven't used that word in a few weeks, and I feel like the people they're asking for it.
I'm asking for it, yeah.
I had a hard time, I'd say, for the first 30 or 40 minutes getting into this film because of so much attention that's been going on around like MGTOW and men rights activists and incels and things like that. So for me, it was really tough to like separate the cultural conversation that's going on with the way that that this guy who's oftentimes kind of taken in a particular direction within this like online subculture that now has manifested itself in a couple of public displays of violence. It was hard for me to like get that, and I know it's not the same thing. I know Steve Carell is not an incel. Like he's kind of more like he's given up on love. He'd be like the shy love version of this subset of this subculture. But I couldn't separate myself from that cultural context. So I actually had like a really difficult time watching this film, even though I still laughed my ass off during like the condom scene and things like that. Like there are parts, you know, obviously when he's improvising, getting his chest hair ripped out and shit like that, because you know that whole thing was improvised. And you can see the dudes just fucking cracking up, right? But I still had
Awesome. For the people at home, what's an incel?
So it's short for involuntary celibate, which is actually a really kind of terrible term because it makes it seem like you're a victim or something like that. But it's a group of online individuals who have kind of been lurking around like Reddit and 4chan and things like that, who are basically dudes who feel that women have ostracized them because they're nerdy or because they don't conform to certain standards of norms of beauty. And so there's this kind of like circular self-referential hatred that's been building within these communities, and it's led to a couple of outbursts of anger. Most recently, they believe the attack in Toronto, where the man drove a van and killed 10 people, injuring I think 13 or 14 others. He posted something on Facebook glorifying this guy named Elliot Rodger, who you guys might remember was the Isla Vista killer, who made that post called like Elliot Rodger's Retribution on YouTube, where he talks about how he's been spurned by women and he was going to get his retribution and kill them because they weren't giving them his sex and the love that he thought that he deserved. So I couldn't quite get this weird, perverse desire for sex that the film sort of like manifests as a whole out of my mind, and then also this kind of like nerdy, shy, love shy kind of guy who's this 40-year-old celibate guy out of my mind and separate that from the culture. And I know it's not the same thing, but I had a tough time watching it because of that.
This may surprise you, but in my notes, I have incel written down. It actually made me think about that as well. But we'll get to that. So the first time I saw this movie, I was a junior in high school, and I thought it was hilarious. I had no idea who Judd Apatow was. I had not seen Freaks and Geeks. But this was the first time that I had experienced, you know, the Judd Apatow. I mean, it was the first time anyone had really experienced the improvisational nature of comedy that he then, for the next decade and a half, will come to own basically all studio comedy. This was the beginning of it. And, you know, in my youth, I was exactly the target audience, and I bought in hardcore. This time watching it, similar to Austin, I was a little bit critical. But, you know, see, the difference between me and Austin is that, like, when these things enter my mind, I I'm like pissed off. I'm like, no, like it's like we have this panoptic ideology that is like it has like ruined me. Like I can't enjoy a movie anymore. I can't enjoy jokes anymore. Not even because I agree with some of the things. Like I don't think that this movie is problematic at the end of the day, but that voice, that cultural voice that would deem it so, I can't get away from, and it's killing me. You know, it's killing me. It's destroying everything. But I'm actually glad that you brought that up, Austin, because I think it's going to lead to a pretty interesting conversation.
The only scene that I thought really fit that category was them playing video games and you're gay because you did this scene.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Where
Really?
you're just kind of like, I mean,
Yeah,
it's more
I mean-
just because none of the jokes were funny. It's like, you know, if you land the jokes, then
Yeah, you
can
know how
kinda
I know
say,
you're
well,
gay?
Yeah.
It's funny, that we share our office with a director who's worked on SNL and stuff, and he's making a movie right now. And I told him, hey, I just watched 40-Year-Old Virgin. He goes, oh, haha, you know how I know you're gay? And then he just stopped and said, there's no way you can get away with that today.
Right.
And that's nothing unique to this film. I feel like you watch culture has accelerated so much that you go back even 4 years and you're going to see that in comedy. So it's not something particularly unique to this film, but so interestingly, before I go into the recap, I want to bring up a term that, one of our fans emailed us. His name is Michael, and he studies at George Mason. I'm actually curious if any of you guys are familiar with this Greek term, kairos, K-I-R-O-S. Have you heard of that, Austin?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about it quite a bit in a piece that I'm trying to publish right now. It's a Greek word for time, but it's different from
Yes.
chronos. Or ion, which is understood more as eternity. Chronos is what we think is chronological time. Kairos means either like the time to act or the opportune moment. And it means like an age, like a particular age. It's an age, but it's an age in which it's the opportune moment to act. You can't not act. So it comes out of rhetoric and things like that. But yeah.
So at least Michael, it seems to me, he sent us an email, and he's going to interview me for one of his studies, but he suggested that he is talking about how the way we analyze media are the result of the specific time period that it was written in. And I don't want to go into this too much, but for a long time, I've been searching for a term that explains the phenomenon of, like, let's say you watch Idiocracy today versus 10 years ago. It affects us differently now.
Yeah.
What's the term for that? I don't know if this is the right term, but I think that whatever I'm looking for is a phenomenon that I think is relevant to the way at least I consumed this movie on this most recent viewing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a different season or a different age. So it would be more...
A different zeitgeist.
Yeah,
Right.
zeitgeist. Yeah. It's more applicable than Chronos would be for sure.
Anyway, let's go into a recap. So, 40-year-old virgin Andy is invited to poker night by his coworkers, where they collectively decide it's their mission to get Andy laid for the first time. After a disastrous encounter with a drunk girl, Andy meets Trish, a single mom who runs a business across the street. Through the coaching advice of his friends, Andy is coaxed into trying male waxing, pickup tricks, speed dating, and even a prostitute. All efforts are fruitless, so he takes matters into his own hands and asks out Trish. The date goes well, but Andy's inexperience, coupled with an unexpected intrusion from Trish's daughter, keeps them from having sex. So on the next date, they decide not to have sex until they've had 20 dates. When the 20th date comes around, Andy gets cold feet, alienating Trish and creating a schism in their relationship. That night, Andy gets blackout drunk and goes home with the girl from the bookstore, and once he realizes she's a freak, Andy runs back to Trish and confesses that he's a virgin. She's fine with it, they get married, and Andy finally has sex for the first time, which inspires him to bust out into a song from Hair. End of movie. Now, it's funny that this is a comedy that's 2 hours and 15 minutes long.
Yeah, what the fuck, Judd Apatow?
Dude, I mean, you think this is bad? It got even worse with This Is 40 and whatever the Adam Sandler one was.
Oh, yeah. It continued. You're right.
I would make a note
Funny people, yeah.
about my experience with this movie. It has been tainted because This Is 40 is one of my top 5 least favorite movies that's ever been made. Like,
I never saw it
excruciating.
because of the way you described it. I think I just couldn't handle watching it. Have you seen it, Lily?
I have, yeah. And I agree. I mean, I wouldn't say it's excruciating. To me,
So long, though,
it
you
is,
know?
yeah, but I feel like it could have
2.5.
lost an hour and a half and been a lot better. It's problematic.
Anyway, continue, Jared.
That's Austin's word.
I know. I felt like I had to give an ode. By the way, have you seen Idiocracy recently? Because I watched it for the first time since it first came out like 6 months ago, and it was an amazing experience.
Exactly. The experience was different. I haven't, but the movie for me that actually Ryan and I and Alec, another guy who works with us, we watched it like 4 months ago, and it was a completely different experience, was Network.
Oh, yeah.
Watching Network now is fucking crazy. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so the first question I want to open this discussion up of is, what do we think of Andy? And what I want to specifically point to here is that at the beginning of the movie, I feel like we're laughing at him quite a bit. Like the comedy only works, at least for the bulk of the first half of the movie, if we also buy into this idea that he's a super weirdo for being a virgin at 40. And I'm wondering, do you guys, having watched it now versus back then, did you find yourself reevaluating that? Like, you know, for example, there's a
I
line.
didn't get that though. I mean, to me, it's not that he's weird that he's a virgin. It's that you see all these quirks of his, and it's like that kind of makes sense that he's a virgin because it's like everything that
Yeah.
he does, it's weird. You're like, all right, that just adds to it. I came to a movie called The 40-Year-Old Virgin. This makes sense that this guy's a virgin because, you know.
See, I disagree. I think that at the beginning of the movie, we see that a beautiful woman comes up to Carell and asks, what's the difference between, I don't remember what she says, like Super 8 or Betamax? And he says, I'm not a salesman. And then Jay comes in and swoops in and starts macking on her. And I think the perspective of the film is that like Andy is the stooge. He's the stooge for not hitting on this girl when there's a clear opportunity. And
Right. Exactly.
And then like later when Seth Rogen's character's talking about that he just went over the weekend to Mexico to watch a donkey show and Steve Carell only ate egg salad. Like I think we're the only
didn't
reason
eat it, he just
the
made it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
He's
he
really
just made
excited
it.
about going home to make that egg salad sandwich.
I feel like that joke only works if we think like, oh yeah, Seth Rogen is kind of the normal one and Steve Carell is the weirdo.
I didn't think about him as a weirdo, though. I thought of him as a nerd. What's fascinating to me watching it now that I didn't get in 2005 was like how much the things that were prescribed as nerdy to him are now totally normal, like liking
Yes.
comic books is normal, having comic book figures, riding a bike. He's mocked for riding a bike, and I'm like, how many people now ride a bike? It's seen as like a hipster cool thing to do.
Right.
And
That guy would be getting laid all the time.
In LA,
Exactly.
it's like, oh, you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint. You're sexy and environmentally
Exactly, he'd be
conscious.
seen- Totally.
Right, and then there's one line that like I remember we laughed at back in 2005, and it's I play poker online sometimes.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that was soup. Like that's like oh man, only weirdos
Yeah.
play poker online.
Yeah.
Now you're fucking cool.
But now like that's where probably most poker is played.
But you're right. I do think we were set up to laugh at him, but as a nerd more so than a weirdo. I think the nerd thing was really played up. Even I think some of the opening shots are him with a boner and peeing. Like he can't.
Right.
Like it's just he's supposed to be someone who is really repressed and really nerdy and kind of just internally having all these thoughts but can't convey them to anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I
like
think
even
This
these
is very relatable.
You know, he is.
Go ahead, Austin.
I was going to say that to me is actually maybe the start of where I found it to be a bit problematic. Is that the ultimate joke at the end is right? Is that everybody else that this film is that he's in a state of arrested development. Everybody kind of has some sort of form of stunted growth. You know, you got the dude that's cheating on his girl. You got the guy who's like this lovesick puppy that's suffering from like erotomania, where it's like he was in love with Mindy, but you know they were dating for like 4 months, but he's like obsessed with her. And then you got Seth Rogen, who's kind of like a stoner, quote unquote, loser guy. But none of them are adults, really, right? But at the end,
Yeah.
supposedly Steve Carell becomes a real adult because he really understands what it means to be an adult, and it's to have like a committed relationship with somebody. And so there's this like you can tell that Judd Apatow, who's he seems like he's trying to live like the good American dream kind of nuclear family thing, right? With his wife, who's also in the film again, who's fucking hilarious, and the kids and stuff like that. And so that's like the moral of the story, right? That he becomes the good adult. He finally learns what it really means to grow up and be a man. It's not just about putting the pussy on a pedestal and chasing tail, but it's about really becoming someone who connects with somebody, and which I think is just hokey and corny. But beyond that, the only reason that trajectory works is because, like you guys have been saying, is that we're supposed to kind of buy into the idea that he's already kind of a freak in terms of the way that we look at things, right? Culture looks at us like, oh, we're supposed to chase tail and we're supposed to go out and get laid, and we have like these animal passions, and that's like normal, but it shouldn't be normal. And so that's where the tension and the humor comes in. And I think that's kind of just like, I don't know, it sets us a really weird like conservative paradigm that I just kind of think. I don't know.
See, funny you say conservative because I would almost say that it's the opposite. It's like completely saturated in like hookup culture. Imagine just think of the title of this movie. Mm-hmm. You know that the 40-year-old virgin. I suppose we're meant to believe it's a comedy because nothing is more ridiculous than a man who is 40 years old and he's still a virgin. Can you imagine imagine being a 25-year-old kid or a 20-year-old kid watching this movie, being a virgin, and then seeing all this comedy and saying to yourself, like, shit, I've got fucking 15 years before I better get
They're gonna make a movie about me.
I better get this shit on lock, or I am literally like the subject of like cultural lampoonery. Like being a virgin at 40 is so abnormal, is so pathetic that it's the joke of an entire 2.5-hour movie that revolutionized comedy. You know, like, and this is where I thought